So I'm going to talk about universal credit first of all. Now, first of all, if you asked me, if I told you that tomorrow I could give you, free of charge, I could give you a system which organically and naturally provided a complete reflection of how inequality shapes our economy, which provided a demonstration of low wages, housing costs, the links with motherhood pay penalty, the economic imprint of equality legislation, of barriers to work. I could give you a system which crossed paid and unpaid spheres, naturally, which organically reflected evolving legal duties, including legal responsibilities to emancipate yourself from violence, and that I could give this to you tomorrow for no money. I could do it. And you know what we would have to do? We would have to look at the data in our welfare system and just accept what it does. What you are witnessing with universal credit at the moment is a very seriously interesting process of institutional definition. Now, by and large, universal credit will still be shaped by the forces it has always been shaped by and will end up the shape that it always would have ended up, regardless of policy. But what was attempted in 2010 was that when faced with an expansion of welfare spending that had included the working population, and when faced with a financial crisis and a need to deflect blame for the economics that had failed to address what the financial crisis did, the same people behind that economics saw our welfare system as an opportunity to quite literally take control of the entire working class, and instead of addressing the data in this system, decided to reproduce a class identity. And they thought this would work. And me and the people who I used to work at the DWP with sat when they announced universal credit and just went, no. And this is a slow motion car crash. Now, it's been clear. I was saying at the LSE that it was undeliverable 3 years ago. I knew it was undeliverable at the time. The Guardian were told it was undeliverable. Labour had already had universal credit. A think tank meeting with Stephen Timms in 2012, he was laughing about how funny it was that it wasn't deliverable, because that would be stuff they could use against the Tories, and his only concern was the IT. Now, institutions evolve organically, and our benefit system will always provide a natural record of how inequality shapes our economy, which the belief system that we've had and the policymakers that we've had have never wanted to look at that information, because that would tell them stuff about the functioning of the rest of the economy. Our welfare system has always sat within a network of other institutions linked in with the family, linked in with the market sphere, and has always been the key to keeping public spending down in other areas. But instead of looking at the information that it provides, we have been trying to elevate its coercive potential. And welfare spending is very corrosive. It's incredibly corrosive. We have to use it with a great deal of care. And we have to know what it corrodes, and we have to know that if you expand welfare spending into your working population, that you may be damaging wages. We have to know, we have to learn now that welfare spending kind of causes a problem at elite level where they can't help but use that control, and they will try and reproduce that class identity, and have just attempted to remove citizenship for everybody within that system, even though most of the people within that system are clearly identifiable as already protected by equality legislation. Fixing universal credit is a doddle. You have to throw away the computer system that they've just spent 20 billion quid on, the computer system that they never should have attempted in the first place. And what you're seeing is an institution that's trying to move to the point, the organic point, where it needs to be redefined for a new cycle, where we need to look at the legislation at its core, because it's actually legislation that's at the core of an institution and will decide how it evolves. And we have to wait until this has played out. So the decision has been made with universal credit that rather than addressing the failures of welfare economics, rather than looking at the failures in this system, rather than accommodating the very, very serious problems that have been made evident by the attempted imposition of universal credit, they're going to let the boundaries decide themselves through crisis. So they're rolling it out anyway. And that's people I know whose lives are being destroyed by it. Some people I don't think are going to recover from it. Some people are too sick to fucking move anyway and are still being, abused by this system. I live in mortal fear of universal credit. I live in mortal fear that I will have to claim universal credit. Tax credits are bad enough. And basically, because universal credit was an attempt to ignore what our welfare system did, was an attempt to ignore the forces that had shaped it, was an attempt to ignore the information that it contained, an attempt to instead reproduce a class identity and take control of the working population. It is now generating crisis. Now, what these crises will do, as well as the 100,000 deaths that have already been caused by this welfare reform, is they will expose dysfunction in other institutions, and they will keep metastasizing, they will keep getting bigger until we have taken the whip out of this system. And we will come to the same point where this institution has to be redefined for a new age, and we will have to recognise at that point, within the legislation that we use to define it, the failures that went before. And one of the failures is that for 30 years we have not looked at the data in this system, and instead we have been using a statistical mirror that economists have been using to deflect blame. And I think this is probably brewing into a crisis where that politics of blame is also at the root of Brexit and a whole bunch of other stuff. And we're coming to a point where crises are metastasizing to expose the roots of the crisis. And at the roots of the crisis are a politics and policy-making culture who don't know what this system does or want to. Now, our benefit system will fix itself, regardless. This will continue. This is a hugely powerful institution which provides a natural reflection of the economy it should be a stabiliser. It should tell us when our housing market is overheated. It should tell us when our wages are falling too low. It should tell us what the imprint is of equality legislation, what it's costing us that people experience discrimination and inequality. It should supplement sectors like care, and it should supplement a whole bunch of sectors where the money isn't in those sectors to produce the wages, so we need welfare systems to top it up. We have a self-employed population. Our job centre infrastructure should contain financial advice, financial literacy, HMRC, tax returns, assistance. We need to be using all this infrastructure that we can't use because abusive relations and normal relations cannot coexist. And what Universal Credit has attempted to do is to ignore all those functions and all that data to stick with the belief system that we had in 2010, which is bunk. The problem is that not only was it undeliverable in 2010, but it's continued to be undeliverable, and even as it has become apparent to everybody it is undeliverable, it has exposed dysfunction in other areas. So Ian Duncan Smith more or less resigned, saying, knowing fine well it was undeliverable, and Jeremy Corbyn pretended not to notice, because he just exploited welfare reform to get to Downing Street. Which is why they've just upheld welfare cuts in the last Labour manifesto, because it doesn't matter a fuck to him that 100,000 people have died as a result of welfare reform, and that this system is mangling lives. Our welfare system is very, very easy to fix. It will fix itself. Market forces, including evolutionary forces, will continue to shape it. It will continue to provide a dynamic reflection of how inequality shapes the economy. The secret to dealing with universal credit is to understand that we need that data at Monetary Policy Committee level, and we need to start learning and understanding what this system does. But in the meantime, because we have left it so late, I say we, not me, I've been screaming that this is unfucking deliverable for 8 years now. We have now gone past the point where these crises can be addressed, and its boundaries will address through crisis, and they're going to take out the disciplines and individuals who did not act to prevent it being rolled out. Now, what this will do is it will place our welfare system at the centre of a bunch of other institutions which are also failing, and we actually needed this cumulative failure because actually our cash transfer system is the only tool that we have that we can use to actively keep spending down in other institutions. So you can use your welfare system to manage spending in health and education, especially social work, which is supposed to be a minor institutional join function for when everything else isn't working. Your welfare spending is the most effective spending in the economy. It's almost immune from fraud. If you included the fraud rate that's in our benefit system in a business plan for any business to your bank manager for a loan, your bank manager would send back that business plan and say it is not realistic to have a fraud and error rate that low. The reason the individualism and the blaming welfare claimants work so effectively is because everybody truly believes this is taxpayers' money and should be treated respectfully, no more so than welfare claimants, which is why we know that the names of benefits are really important, because if you put a name on a benefit, that's what people will use it for. We are going through a process where the belief system that has shaped our welfare system and its use as an abusive tool is falling apart. And that's going to feed back to institutions like the LSE, it's going to bounce back to political parties, it's particularly going to damage trade unions like PCS and the Labour left, who have just actively worked to prevent discussion of this system failure when it really needed to be discussed. But the end point won't change. We will still get to the point where this institution defines its boundaries through crisis, places itself at the centre of lots of other institutions, and the question is whether policymakers can see it, and they currently can't because they're scared of the pile of 100,000 dead bodies. You know, one of the benefits of the Labour left triangulating on austerity and actively preventing discussion of it is they have left the way open for the rest of the Labour Party and for the Tories to say, well, this was subject to consensus that even the Labour left held up. And I will say to you, as a single parent, this was done by public consensus. But we are now in the crisis, which will expose what this system does and also expose the belief system behind universal credit. And what they have to do is get rid of that computer system, because even though the civil service can adapt to computer systems that are shit, this one is beyond saving. And it's currently being used to attempt to fight the way that this institution is evolving. So universal credit is going to go. The next video is about the legislation that underpins the formation of new institutions, and then the video after that is about universal basic income and what that represents, because it's dangerous nonsense.